Good afternoon. I am Anto Budiojo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our objective is to discuss advances in smart buildings and figure out where things are headed. Our profiles are all listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you wonder who we are. Most important point here is to just remind us all that views expressed are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do make comments and questions on the Zoom chat. I'm going to try and minimize my talking because I just cough all the time. And also the slide deck is on mondaylive.org. Our focus this month, our theme is overcoming barriers, and our agenda today is like normal. We just have a normal chit chat and then we'll get to our theme. But today we're going to be focusing on the overcoming part of it, not so much of the barriers, because the last couple of weeks we've really been talking about the barriers both on the technology and on the business side. So that should be interesting. But before we get there, Ken, what's going on?
Thank you very much, Anto. We got our July issue online. ESGs are us, getting good response into that. We're now working on our August issue, and the theme is preparing for AHR Expo 2023 in Atlanta. And I'm asking industry to help us curate the messages our industry wants to take to Atlanta. There's been an awful lot of stuff happened since Vegas. I believe Mark is still writing me an accounting of some of his thoughts. I would love to have everybody share their thoughts. Mostly what I'd like is, even if you're so pushed for time you can't get us any kind of an article or an opinion piece, if you could just jot us an email and say this topic needs to be on the agenda, because there's a lot of stuff going on in everybody's mind and everybody is extremely busy. So it's hard to get things done. And I think that's my message. And speaking to the barrier is that the barrier is we have to work together as an industry, and the busier we are with our own little bailiwicks, it's harder to sort of understand what other folks are doing, but we need to do that. And I'm hoping to be able to shed some light on that shortly in our new website, that we'll kind of have a whole bunch of people simultaneously, instantaneously interacting. So I'm looking forward to that. One of the items that I think needs to be discussed at AHR Atlanta is the metaverse. And we've got an article in our August issue. And this is what it says. It's very sensitive, I think, to automated buildings, because automated buildings was born and grew up in the internet era. And the metaverse is definitely the replacement, I think, for that era. And as much as you get caught up in the hype of it, there's an awful lot of moving pieces that are going to change our lives. So anyway, this is the words from the article. Although it's the early stages, the metaverse will change how people interact with technology and themselves. Some define the metaverse as a virtual world platform that allows people to interact. Some relate to it to virtual reality and describe it as Web3. This article views it at a broader term that seamlessly connects our physical world with several virtual worlds platforms using existing and newer interfaces. I think this is all kind of mystic to old folks like myself, but when I've just spent time with my daughter and her peers, and they're just talking a different talk, and how they see the world unrolling is completely different. And they come at it from a gamer's point of view. And I think that's how the internet grew. It followed the gamers as well. And I think you'll see our industry will follow the metaverse. Back to you, Anto.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I think that's an interesting subject that we probably will need to touch on here on Monday Live. But before digging into that, who do we have? Gina. What's going on, Gina?
Thanks, Anto. So I just put this up here, a little bit of information for a couple of reasons. One, of course, you know, the product that I have is SaaS related. So this was, of course, was interesting to me. But it's also because in our industry, SaaS or anything cloud-based is still somewhat of a barrier, I think. And so I was doing a little bit of research on B2B SaaS. You know, a lot of times we get pushback, oh, I don't want it cloud-based, I want it on-site, I want an on-prem solution and things like that. And I just think it's really interesting because, you know, we have, 15,000 SaaS companies. These are specific to B2B offerings, and they cover a wide range, not just in our industry, but, you know, anything from CMMS to, you know, a CRM or what have you. The interesting thing is that the B2B companies that use that, if you can see there, you know, large companies with over 1,000 employees, they have about 177 SaaS apps. Purpose of saying that is, you know, when customers say to us, well, no, I don't want it cloud-based, I want something on-prem, it's not like they don't use SaaS today, okay? So let's just be clear on that one. And then the other thing that I found interesting was 48% of the companies have a 1-year contract and 11% have a 3-year contract. So obviously companies really like that 1-year contract. The other thing that I didn't put up here was they said, you know, here's some tips for, you know, always giving them 3 months of, you know, to try it out and see. That's a little bit difficult in our company. The other thing was, I thought was interesting is 92% of all businesses host at least part of their IT systems in the cloud. And that was actually much higher than I thought. And I thought it was really interesting because, you know, we have this thing about our OT, the IT, and again, going back to, no, I have to have everything on-prem. So when we're talking to customers, having cloud-based technology is not something new. It's not something that they don't use. So when you get pushback to that, I thought this was good reference. Now, the other thing that was interesting, and again, this includes all SaaS platforms, not necessarily in our industry, they said the average time to win customers was more than 91 days. So we probably could quadruple that, and that would probably apply more to our industry, as we all know. But I just thought this was kind of a little bit of interest since we're talking about barriers and we're talking about cloud-based. And so, you know, always kind of point out these stats. We're not delivering something new here. And I do, of course, understand the ramifications of our systems in SaaS and even their limitations, but that was all.
Interesting numbers.
Yeah.
The 92% doesn't surprise me if you think of things like email, for instance.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
And Bill, this probably goes a lot to what you're doing as well, you know, with TossyBox. So
well, it's so interesting. Honestly, guys, we could do a whole month on this topic right here, but I'd be curious why smaller organizations like have so many fewer. I guess it's just the size of the organization. That's one thing. I'm also finding the psychology is different, and or their accounting systems limit them, believe it or not. All kinds of goofy little excuses. I do remember being at Realcomm, the previous Realcomm, and all the guys that were up there, the enterprise customers, they're like, help us outsource. We wanted SaaS. We don't want to do anything, which totally lines up here. Like, just do it for us. And that's what's been in my head. When that dude said that, that's been in my head ever since.
yeah, and I would also say that probably over the last year and a half is the first time I've seen RFPs and specifications that actually say, I want an all cloud-based solution. So anyway, so yeah, maybe this is something we tackle on some future calls.
And I think it was interesting comparison you made halfway through between CRM and CMMS. And when you look at these things down here, you know, if someone was signing up for a CRM sort of package, a Salesforce, they'd be committing to it for a long time because you're going to put all the data in. Yet a CMMS thing, you spend a lot of time putting, data in, but you go, hey, I may change them in a year or two's time and stuff. It's just different mentality coming from different people in the organization.
Yeah.
I think.
You got that right. We're 3-year contract people. That's our preferred, and everybody wants less. So we just charge them an upcharge. It's like, fine, but 1.25 if you're going, and then 1.4 going 1 year.
Yeah.
The-
And I think it's also interesting what Roger says is that, SaaS applications, when you're looking at a CRM or an accounting system or whatever, those are not plug and play. I mean, you still have a lot of integration work on that back end. These are not just, oh, let me just start it up like an Excel or a Microsoft Word or whatever. You still have a lot of integration and a lot of that back end work that you have to do. So, having longer term, most of those, I would be surprised if they were 1 year when you have that much work that goes into it.
The extension of that, though, Gina, which is the other thing that's interesting, this 92%, that means in the IT world, their market is pretty much saturated, right?
Mhm.
So they've got pretty much everyone. And what that means from a product perspective is that you will pull a lot more effort into making your feature functions better, faster, cheaper, easier.
Yes.
Because you're stealing market at that point in time. You're not acquiring new market, you're trying to steal it from your competitor. So they've had the ability to concentrate on improving their product features and capabilities to do migrations and data transfers and stuff like that, which is we're still in the early days of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was just thinking about is that SaaS probably pulls in other SaaS services. So if you actually start to get into SaaS, then it sort of changes the dynamics of the operation, and it's sort of other services can be brought in much more easily.
And it's a more more mature market as well, compared with where we're trying to make it become part of our market. The IT guys have been doing this for quite some time.
Yeah.
To extend that, Roger, too, so in our recent case studies that we've had, when we have finally got the IT guy involved in what we're doing, all the barriers suddenly disappear. I'm talking about barriers, right? All the barriers that the OT guys had always thrown up suddenly evaporate in front of me. The cyber's secure is resolved. The data bandwidths are resolved. The uptimes are resolved. It's just magical.
Absolutely. That's so good. So wait, Echo, just one more thing that's interesting, Gina, that you said here. You said, all right, 48% have a 1-year contract. And then you said, which is interesting because a lot of this stuff is so complicated. What I'm seeing here is, if you've got a service that's so complicated that it's going to be hard for the customer to extricate themselves, give them 1 year. Who gives a crap? They're not going anywhere. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, and we do.
Going back to Anno's thing there, it's interesting. The IT guys have gone from the enemy to people we're suddenly liking.
Yeah.
And I will say this. I will be really anxious to know how long it takes us to get to us being 92% of what we do hosted in the cloud. I will also say this, as someone who started this business doing smart building design and consulting, and on through the years, even with EasyIO doing IP-based controllers, I will tell you the least amount of pushback I've ever had is in IT. And we always had a very, from the very beginning, we engaged with IT and we talked through these things. And it's funny, but when I look at, those on the OT side, there's always this big barrier, play on words there, between OT and IT. And I've always found, I remember one time I walked into a big box retailer and it was meeting with the sustainability people, and they were much more difficult. And then they said, well, we want you to talk to our IT guys. And we said, well, we'll bring them on in. They came in, we said, here's our data sheet. This is our, these are our security measures or whatever on our controllers, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, okay, looks good, and walked right out. It was less than a 5-minute conversation, and they approved it right then and there. And as long as your stuff is compatible with the latest in the cybersecurity measures, and as long as you engage IT and get their input on that, it's never really been a problem for me. But then again, I come from IT, so.
All right, let's move on. So since we're in the height of summer and there's a lot of heat around, I thought the story on the left is kind of interesting. So some cities, a number of cities are hiring chief heat officers. Imagine that one. That's kind of a little weird.
CHO.
CHO.
That's weird.
And
CV.
yes, I'm into heat. And the other thing is, we're talking about, this is all about ESG. Interesting article from HSBC, the bank, talking about scope 3 is potentially being really, this sort of quote here is really sort of interesting. Scope 3 emissions are a useful indicator for examining climate risk and true climate ambitions for companies. So as a way of sort of measuring it, they're promoting this as being the way we think about that. So thought that was interesting. But let's get into the topic of the month, overcoming barriers. So we've been talking about barriers, so we kind of not want to talk about barriers so much and focus on overcoming. And we did this last week. We're going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to pose a question for us all. Everybody on the panel and also in the audience, please do chime in with an answer. As an industry, we need to what? Ideally,
And sorry, before you get into that, did you pick up on David Katz? The chat's disabled. Did you enable that?
Oh, I've got to do that as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. I don't know why. Something must have changed on Zoom. There you go. That should be.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. Can somebody confirm it's working? So
It is a new security feature.
thank you, David. So as an industry, we need to
Work together.
Not reinvent the wheel constantly.
Educate.
Yeah, I love it. Educate, good.
Although I'll wax and wane on the educate one, but
why?
I'll be positive. I'll stay in positive. I don't know, to relate it to a home example, at the moment, the technology is becoming so complex that, don't want to be the negative side, but, a lot of times we tend to go all the way back to basics, right? And is there at some point when do we over-educate, right? I mean, our deep level down into MSTP and Bacnet and stuff, and do the people really care? Where's the cutoff point on the education piece?
Well,
and I think sometimes
maybe that matches with what Sean just said, is to simplify the products. So
yeah, there you go.
less education. So
yep.
Simplifying the products and offerings is another way of actually removing the need for education. Right?
It's absolutely something that Sean mentioned there. I mean, as an industry, we've made it overcomplicated in the years. Many years ago, people used to do it so you could get the maintenance business, but it is overcomplicated. And I think it's, we're kind of guilty of that as an industry. Ever try to explain to your kids when you're in the controls industry what you do for a living? They go, well, what do they do? What controls? What are you controlling?
Yeah, and they just want to go to the Nest thermostat, just turn the dial, right?
Yep. But it's the same as every app. An app, there's loads of stuff going on underneath. It's just an easy interface for you to actually access information and work through things.
And just to sort of extend on that, Roger, that's one of the things I see. If you're doing any sort of smart home technology in your home at all these days, you've got the number of light choices, thermostat choices, etc. Then all the apps that come with it. One of the things that strikes me is the ones that I like from a product perspective, whether it's not that it's not the light globe, the bulb itself and how the bulb works or whatever. It's how easy the app is so that my wife can use it. Because if I have to keep teaching her, then that's just, I throw it away. And I will not buy the globe, not because of whether the bulb's good or not, it's because the app's easy.
And
Right.
a lot of that comes down to standards, I think, Anna, because the way I write a control loop is better than the way you write your control loop. And you think yours is better than Bill's. And we've always
Right.
protected that. You know, if there's a standard way a control loop works, why the hell isn't it just a standard, which is where the industry's going? And maybe that's something we need to do, is just get over it and accept, you know, standard ways of controlling things instead of having 50 different ways to sequence a chiller. Maybe there's, you know, should one, and then we can get over it and make life a lot easier in the interface and the engineering of it all.
And I would tell you, Roger, that goes all the way up the spectrum. If back to our stack, that goes up and down all through our stack. You know, so another case study I had just recently, you know, we do a lot of SkySpark and fault detection work and stuff like that. And you know, it's a powerful tool. And what happens is, you know, our customers, once they get it, they tend to make it overly complicated. They go, oh, we're going to do really complicated, you know, rule sets. And part of our challenge a lot of times is how do we just help them simplify that to what are you really trying to do here, right? And so my point is, your point about that at the control level can just as easily be applied to the, you know, fault detection rule writing level. You can write some really complicated, and we all know that, you know, we all look for the same 95% of things that we look for in a fault detection process.
Yeah.
Maybe to roll that all up in one word, it's clarification. As an industry, we need to clarify.
I was just going to comment on your previous comment, Ken. We need to work together. I think that was your opening comment, and it's almost like that ties in with what we've been talking about in terms of education, reducing the complexity. Is that the systems need to work together. It's not just us needing to work together, but the systems need to work together. Maybe I should put it the other way around. It's not just the systems, it's us as individuals and companies.
Yeah, I actually had lunch today. Ken, go ahead, man.
Something I was going to add is, as an industry, everything you've been talking about, Anno was talking about, how are we giving too much information? I think we all have to agree what level we do provide our communication, and if we can provide some similarity, that will add to the clarity. The trouble is we all kind of come at it a different direction. We bring up a few new acronyms that somebody else hasn't used, and that slows us down rather than speeding us up. So I think we've got to get some of this stuff into a standard for the industry, or a protocol, or none of those words are really working, but a communication anyway.
Which you have to roll back and think that, you know, the work that we did on the stack was really one of the attempts at doing that, right? Is helping people simplify the understanding.
So Ken, are you saying as an industry we need to standardize?
Maybe not. That's not the right word I'm looking for. It's basically, if we can maybe just talk at the same level. We have some people that are diving down at a bit and byte and communication, IoT communication protocol, and other people that are talking about what the actual product does. If we can kind of something more agree with where we are in the stack. I guess the stack is always a good thing to go back to. Where are we talking on the stack? I guess if we start our conversation with a picture of the stack, at least we have an idea of what the discussion is about.
So I'm hearing from you, as an industry, we need to communicate better.
For sure.
I'll throw in this, that as an industry, we need to change the conversation to fully understand the business side as well as the technology side. It seems like we talk, for the most part, more about the technology side than we do the business side. And I'm a firm believer that the owner operator is now more concerned with the business side outcomes versus the technology itself.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's a good point, because I think the thing I was going to say is we need to work more with the prop tech industry, because what is it they need? You know, I mean, we've seen how much money's been, 20 odd billion thrown in investments in prop tech. That may well be lease management and other things and stuff, but they also now have got the connectivity. And if that's where the money's being thrown and through to, and what are the information they need, we need to kind of, we've talked about edge to cloud for years, but how much coordination has been going on with those guys that are separate almost from what we do until some late stage in the game.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that we were talking about, Gina came up with some stats on SaaS, on cloud services. The other way to look at cloud and SaaS is that it is the common denominator of a lot of services. What you were speaking about, Roger, it really doesn't matter if you're talking about CMMS or something else. There is now growing evidence that they work better in the cloud, and they also potentially work better with each other in the cloud.
Yeah.
Right. That problem is actually, the cloud has actually made that disappear, or it's created a place where things can work together there.
Well, I mean, if you just staying on that for a second, but if you look at when you talk about cloud-based and go back to Roger said, it's somewhat like having the difference between having a rotary dial phone and a smartphone. You know, you're not going to get a new rotary dial phone until you pull it out and put a new one on. But when you have a smartphone, there's always instant updates, whether it's an application, whether it's the OS or something of that nature. And I think that's one thing that's very interesting when you look at our particular industry. When you look at the traditional, and I'm just going to say this is, I'll probably irritate someone, when you look at traditional BMS, it's put in there, it stays in there 7 to 15 years. How often is it updated? And you have to be current on cybersecurity now. So how often is that done? And we all know that the manufacturers of some of these systems are not always the fastest at this. So I think when you're looking at cloud-based or SaaS, you're getting the latest updates, you're getting the latest cybersecurity. And especially when we live in an environment now where every day you turn on the TV, there's a new pandemic of some sort going on. So there's a new sensor, there's a new meter, there's a new piece of equipment. And all of those things are actually either cloud-based technology or IP-enabled technology. And if you're a school or something like that, and you need these different types of technology, you need a way of actually implementing it that's fast and quick and easy and open, of course. That's my diatribe. I'll stop now.
You know, a lot of the things that everyone's bringing up, the root of those are fear of some kind, right? So really, as an industry, we need to overcome fears, that get to the root cause and overcome those fears that people are having, whether it be security or ownership or something else.
That's interesting.
I brought that up on our first conversation, that I thought one of the biggest barriers is a person's psyche for fear of failing. So why do I choose this technology, this manufacturer or whatever? And then the next day after I made that decision as a building owner, oh, well, now I just found out this one. Well, you know, maybe I should have gone with that one instead or whatever. And so instead of doing something and feeling confident about it, I'm going to do nothing because I've got that fear of failing.
I'm confident that doing nothing will not get me fired.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Whether you're the CEO or just a guy person responsible for, like, that's the old IBM, Ernst & Young thing. That's really, and by the way, that's why no great tech comes out of the big Fortune 500 companies. The CEOs are just trying to keep their big paycheck coming. They're not looking to do anything unusual. That's why it's people like us that got to bring the cool stuff.
That's the whole innovator's dilemma thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that also goes back to, I forgot who said it on this call when you pose the question, what do we need to do as an industry? And that is work together. And I do think that that is one thing that we don't do well, is work together.
Right.
And when you look at a lot of the other companies out there, I mean, Steve Jobs and Gates, they started out working together, and I think eventually they came back, but we don't do that well. I mean, we have consortiums, or we have committees, and we have this, that, and the other, and we do these things, but we work against each other a lot of the times. And I don't see that that's ever, being someone who's been in this industry for a while, but didn't come at it from a technical or engineering perspective, I have a different view on things. And a lot of times it's just kind of looking at it broadly. And it always seems that sometimes we're at opposing forces when we really should be working more closely together with the technology. I mean, this is a heavy lift, you guys know that. So I would like to see that a lot more of that. And the other thing is, when you do have a lot of innovation in this company or in these companies, they usually get snatched up by some other larger company. And then what happens to it? We all know what happens. If you look at some of the things that Jim Lee and other providers and John Petsy have done in FDD, I mean, they've been able to constantly innovate and grow that. If they had have been consumed by larger companies, we probably would still have maybe 100 rules to our name. But they've managed to be able to innovate not only within our domain, but also with some of the new stuff that's coming out, with some of the IoT that's coming out as well. And so we've got to figure out some way to actually innovate in this industry without being acquired, with being able to work together.
I concur.
Steve.
Yeah, so I want to weigh in on a little bit on, unlike IT, where you've got Google and Microsoft and Apple, maybe one or two others that dominate and have so much market share. We are incredibly fragmented, right? Just within building automation, you've got 15, 20 companies easily, right? And then you have fire and access control and all these other different pieces, parts. So it's very, very hard to get that many players together and on the same page, right? Now, with regard to Mark's comment about fear of failure, okay, there are clear trends, and they were brought up when I first got on the call. One of those being the shift to cloud computing, right? So no doubt about that. So I think as an industry, we all can agree that moving to the cloud has definite benefits. We can, I think, I haven't heard it brought up yet. Well, we have brought up multiple times the need to secure these systems from a cyber perspective. We can all agree on that. And I think there's a strong need for us to all get a lot smarter about networking, because everything's going to IP. We just got to be better from top to bottom about knowing how to network our systems together, in the building, out of the building, however it needs to be done. At those high level trends, I think we could get more of the industry players to participate in some way, to talk about it and help communicate that to the market, that this is where our industry is going. We're making commitments. We're doing things to make it possible for our cloud applications to work nicely together, that we're, and so on. We're making commitments to cyber to make sure that all our data is encrypted. Jim, you've spent the last however many years on Bacnet SC as a good example of that, right? So,
right.
But
so
Steve,
I think we got a way to do this, but we need to take it up a notch and be more high level with our collaboration.
Steve, while I agree with everything you said, and it would be nice to live in a land like that, it is inherent in all the manufacturers that we will not work with one another. And in fact, they'll go out of their way and I'll use a case in point. Many years ago, a certain manufacturer would do anything and everything to, what's the word, talk negatively about another manufacturer whose primary color is orange. This other manufacturer, because again, look at the manufacturers. Everybody's set up into colors, red, orange, blue, green, whatever it is. And it's inherent amongst the DNA of all these manufacturers is that we will not work with one another, and we will not bring people in for the betterment of the industry.
Well, how do we overcome that? Because the problem that we base the way to
We've tried. I think the industry has tried over the years, but
Mark, don't forget the industry partners have been the ones who have driven the development of the Bacnet SC spec. I was on a lot of the calls early on with Jim, and 4 or 5 of the majors are all on that, all participating. And so there's an example where it has worked.
That's a spec. That's something that is one of those, yes, we need to get on there for the betterment, because if we're not on there, people are going to say, why aren't we on there? Why aren't we participating?
It is a movement, Mark, because in earlier days, everybody had proprietary protocols. So at least there is some convergence there where people are thinking we should have the same thing.
Well, I don't know. I continually hear it. And what I hear out there is, well, don't use them because whatever the case is. And
Jim,
their solution is just as, is equally as good as another.
Controllers are a commodity. It's the tools that make the difference.
Of course.
Jim, can you sort of give the broad strokes of the collaboration that you've sort of nurtured around cybersecurity and Bacnet? Because that may
help. So as everyone knows, cybersecurity had been lacking in the industry for many years. So 15 years ago, a technology called Bacnet Addendum G was developed, which was a homegrown security solution. At Symmetrics, we didn't like that because we felt that IT moves in 3-year cycles and the building automation industry moves in 20-year cycles. So we partnered with Cisco and developed a new spec to make an IT-friendly variant of Bacnet that runs on, takes the value of Bacnet, which are the application data definitions, and puts it on top of standard IT protocols and uses standard IT security. That effort was started in 2009, and by 2019, it came out of the ASHRAE committee as Bacnet Secure Connect, or Bacnet SC. Unfortunately, everyone in the community realized that there were a number of key pieces left on the cutting room floor when that happened, and that we quickly needed to assemble a collaboration across the industry, of which we've had all of the major controls companies and many minor ones participate, to make sure that cybersecurity was interoperable. So we wouldn't basically put a proprietary padlock back on every system due to cybersecurity incompatibilities. So that process has taken 2 years, and now ASHRAE has agreed to open a project to publish that for us as an ASHRAE special publication. And there's a spec. But I think we had, very broad industry collaboration on that. And I think it was, I'll let somebody else have the floor, but I'd love to come back and offer a totally different view to the industry in a minute.
So let me ask you this, Jim. All right. So, and Steve, especially you guys. So cybersecurity is a common thing amongst everything. Everyone, every solution, every building, whatever, it's common. That makes sense. So what are other commonalities that the industry, like a cybersecurity, okay? We've tried data. I'm not sure, we're not there yet. We've tried other things. We've tried communication protocols. We're not there yet. So is the answer finding the next cybersecurity thing to in which everybody embraces. And if you don't embrace it, then you're going to lose big time because your solution will not be sold.
I'm going to turn that back on your own rhetoric, Mark, over the years, because I believe in it firmly. It's value. And that we really need to find the value that people are willing to pay for. And that is the commonality that we need to find. Now, I'm gonna say something that's a little bit out of bounds here, but I think the problem with this industry is nothing that's been discussed on the call. I think it's the customer. And if the customer is always right, and the customer is the one that doesn't want to play ball, there is something else that can be done, which is to find a new customer. And, as we keep redefining the problems of the industry, our industry, my solution to that is to go outside of the bounds of the industry, which is what I've been trying to do for years now. And if you just to give a similar value proposition to frame this up, prop tech in general. It didn't exist before. It exists now. People seem to be raising a lot of money and generating value there. It's tangential to what we do, but we don't do it. That's an example of finding value that people are willing to pay for and going for it. But our problem here is primarily getting the existing customer set through the channels that we have to adopt a lot of the wonderful technology we've created. Time to go find other customers in those organizations.
Okay, so the
That,
buyer,
to me,
you find
that's
a different buyer is what you're saying,
Right,
in the organization.
right.
So we've already talked for months about changing our own speak and language and way of being and context creation. Jim's adding on, oh, stop talking to Jig Dish and the same people you've been talking to for years. Go find somebody else who has responsibility for this customer experience or this or that or the other thing. Brilliant. You've got the flexibility now. We've got the flexibility in the application and the customer experience and technology to change the words and find new people to hear us.
It could be that if the buying channels remain the same, though, it could be the audience changes. They still may be purchased, but it's the audience above that needs to be educated and drive it down and be firm at what they do, because they may still not get engaged totally with the project or whatever, but they need to be the influencers to come down on top of the chain that actually, eventually places the orders.
Change of the conversation too.
So, Paul, you guys, a number of you probably remember Paul Oswald from ESI, right? I remember when he made a shift in his business 15 years ago, something like that. And he woke up one day and said, I've got to stop selling to the facilities engineers, and I've got to go to the C-suite and get right to the CFO to show them how they can really derive the value, Jim, that you're talking about. He made a conscious decision. He changed his entire sales approach, and ultimately, the business got sold to CBRE. But I think that was one of the things that impressed CBRE is how he was able to turn this into a valuable service-oriented business as opposed to a contracting business.
Right.
Love it.
But to me, we've got to break away from trying to figure out what we're doing wrong in our industry. The whole premise of the question that Anto had up there, our industry needs to be rethought, because the current state of that industry is that it doesn't adopt new technologies. It never has very well, which is why we had that discussion a couple months ago or a month or two ago about the adoption curve and how that, after 50 years of DDC, we're at 10%. Right?
It's pretty sad.
I mean, that's what we're dealing with. So why not, if the prop tech guys can find other people, I certainly have been able to. I think that's as we got to stop thinking about our industry and break out of the janitorial closet.
And the challenge, Jim, as you said, is that that change hasn't happened, and still we are talking, communicating 485 and stuff like that where does IP and wireless come in? You know, it's, you know, kind of hold on a sec, we, you know, don't want to deal with that stuff. You just hold back.
But I think to Mark's point, Roger, no one even cares about any of that.
No, they shouldn't need to.
It's some value proposition to other groups of people. And that's why I'm so intrigued with ESG and other things, because those things allow us to change the subject.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good thought. I gotta say, Jim, I really love what you're saying. I mean, when I talk to all the folks in this industry, the software people and all that, they all have an inkling that maybe water, wastewater, or fault detection on pipelines or something could be a thing. They have an inkling, but they never actually, I don't know if it's fear, whatever, that keeps them. By the way, it's the same in all verticals, man. It's the same. Your stuff's going to work everywhere. So I love the idea of a conversation at some point about transcending building automation. That's great conversation.
Right.
Early in our discussions, we talked about the value of passion and trust. And almost everybody on this screen has those qualities, and probably longevity and gets factored in there as well. So we are the people to reach out and start these new conversations, because why are we starting that conversation? Because we have the trust of doing this for many years, but we have the passion to change it.
Nice.
Nice.
So it seems to me that something that kind of a change, I totally agree, needs some kind of galvanizing theme. Is ESG that? Because we've seen that cybersecurity has sort of helped us along the way to this point and may be able to get us a little bit further. Is ESG the thing that's going to take us forward? Do we need something like that? Or is it, we were talking about the cloud earlier, is it those kinds of things that seems to be common to everybody? Or do we need that?
I'm going to jump in and say, I don't have an answer. It's a great question, Anto. Do you need a new theme? Do you need a watershed event or something like that? When I hear about ESG, when I hear the term ESG, I start to think of these other letters that became so inane, and it was IoT. It seems like a watershed moment, but then it means so many things to so many people. So my first inkling is ESG, maybe it's a watershed moment that we could take it to, or maybe it's just one of those things that's just going to be like so spread out. So undetermined, but it's an excellent question.
But it has that bit in, Bill, that you're talking about is that, and that Jim was, that ESG at least is reaching out to the CEO and the shareholders and everyone else, because suddenly they got to put something down on paper at the end of year report.
Mm-hmm.
To people that we've never been able to get in touch with before. And at least it's some sort of hook into that arena.
Yep.
And I would argue that there's not one silver bullet here, that all of these things, IoT, ESG, we need to capitalize on all of that.
Tracy, your watch is telling you it's time to stand.
I see that. It's a long meeting.
You know, I mean, I agree what Jim said. You know, I always use, and it's probably, I always use this term, we have to get out of the basement and into the boardroom. And you know, I definitely think that if we focus on, we focus a lot on the technical, the controls, the how, and we need to focus on the what. You know, I mean, a lot of times, you know, what are we delivering?
The outcomes.
Yeah, the outcomes, and we don't really do that. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with distributors, contractors, integrators, programmers, and it's very much about, and rightly so, very much about what it is that they're doing. But we need to be able to communicate that in the outcome of what this means for you without having to get down and bogged down into those very details. What do we deliver and what is that value? And I think that one of the barriers we have is that we don't quite articulate that. I will tell you this was kind of funny as hell, but somebody said this to me today. It was actually Brian Klein. He said this to me, and I hadn't heard this in a really long time. But I remember back in the day when I was working with Jim Sinopoli on smart buildings, and we were doing smart building design, and everybody was like, well, what are you doing? What's a smart building? What is it? What is it? What is it? And then along came 2008, and then the focus on energy and energy management systems and things like that. And I remember, and Brian Klein actually said this verbatim to me today, and I was actually shocked. But I said, somebody said something, the customers used to say, well, what is a smart building, and does it do energy management, and does it do sustainability or whatever? And I always said, that's a byproduct of what we do. Inherently a smart building delivers, efficiency, and it delivers what the outcomes of the operator, the owner is. And so he repeated back to me, he says, smart building, he says, I don't get wrapped around sustainability or energy. He says, Gina, because he's like, that's a byproduct of what we do. But we've never really articulated it in that sense. We've never led with that in a sense. That is what we do. We make operationally efficient buildings with technology. We always start with the technology first versus the outcomes. That's my opinion, of course.
Yeah, I see that we have a great opportunity here to go out as missionaries to these new technologies, these new concepts. And in that, bringing our passion and our trust and learning. I think that's the big thing, is once we enter into these new worlds, we see what it is they are doing, and they change us, and we become a bigger part of what they're trying to achieve. And I think that'll come in our messaging. And when we meet back, as Mark has said so many times, the conversation is changing, and we will all change it. But I think it's individually we have to be the missionaries to take our traditional message to new technologies, whether it's clouds, IoTs, or ESGs, or whatever the flavor of the day is.
Yeah, so I'm sort of wondering how to do that. And what I was saying earlier, I think maybe misinterpreted, or I didn't say it clearly. The way I think, it's almost like we need a very, very clear vision that we can actually just say, and actually not just say, but actually we have to work on it, but actually that can actually aggregate all of these points together. And I don't know if that's even possible to do.
So as a statement, Anto, if you were, we talked, the statement of the day is, is a negative. What are the things that are preventing us from, right? As opposed to a positive that says smart buildings are blank.
Well,
what are smart buildings, right?
maybe not
point,
even, not even say a smart building is. It's some other vision that can then pull in smart buildings. I mean, if you think about, Bill Gates and desktop on every, a computer on every desktop, it's not talking about software. It's talking about the outcome of computing being all over the place, being everywhere.
Well, sure. I mean, you could turn around and say the most energy efficient buildings utilize smart building technology. You could make a strong statement like that. Every energy well-run building in the world utilizes smart building technology. We don't have to explain it, because the minute you start going into what the smart building technology is, you're going to lose everybody, right? You're going to have left the boardroom and you're down in the basement again. But it's right back to why are we doing this with Simon Sinek, right? And the how is really about the outcomes, and then the what is the last thing you want to talk about: building automation, IoT sensors, metering, all that stuff.
Maybe we need to go back to our roots and do a better job of defining what is a smarter building.
Right.
Using the stack and reaching out and grabbing all of these pieces and showing how they could be encompassed in the smarter building. Building on
A
what
view
Nina
with
said.
a view of a new audience or a new target
Mhm.
that would
Right.
receive that message, being the C-suite basically.
Yeah, if we weren't calling on Newcomb and Boyd, just not, we're not calling on a consultant, we're not calling on the director of facilities, but our target audience is someone in the C-suite, all the way up to the CEO, what would we be saying? What's that conversation look like?
What's the vision?
Yeah, that
of
we're painting
building?
for that individual who's running that company, right? The board, et cetera. I think that would be really a worthwhile effort for us to undertake next month.
Jim's
Let me
always,
just frame that for I'm sorry. I seem to be no, I'm not muted. Sorry. Let me frame it for 1 second. If you look at enterprise technology that has come to all other vertical markets in terms of HR and accounting and finance and Salesforce automation, all of these things. What we are actually bringing with smarter buildings is enterprise management to this other silo, right?
Right.
So I think to me, that is an argument that plays better at the C-suite. You've got this huge swath of your assets that you haven't deployed the same technology on that you have everywhere else. And with analytics and with smarter buildings and DDC, we can provide solutions that provide that enterprise management to a silo. So we're convincing them to do what they've already done in the rest of their business. They just forgot this dank backwater, the janitorial closet, to do it in, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing, Jim, you always talk about the janitorial closet that we serve. And I think we've been serving it for so long that we've kind of put ourselves in a closet too. And we have to get out of that closet, and we have to think a lot bigger thoughts than we've ever thought in the past. And we have to try and understand all of these pieces, and it's complicated. But I think we can do it. But we just have to get out of our comfort zone and just follow your lead and charge into some of these new markets.
Right. And maybe stop talking about the existing industry as our market.
Yeah, right.
So
Gotta
the
come out of the
secret,
closet.
yeah, the secret to success is come out of the closet, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for leading us, Ken.
Yeah.
Okay. The group last week, we were talking about August, and we're not actually sure what the theme of August is, but I think this will inform that. I think out of this conversation, there can be something that we can form into a theme in August. Does somebody want to make a brief closing sort of wrap up and before we end up?
Well, I think we concurred that as an industry, we have to communicate a lot better. We have to work together a lot better. We have to think bigger thoughts. We have to get out of our comfort zone and just move ahead and really create smarter buildings.
Communicate a different, slightly more business-oriented message to a different audience, different end customer, so to speak.
As long as we don't end up where we were just talking about just now, we end up with Gina coming out of the basement to go in the closet.
I won't say it. Okay. So what's our enterprise pitch to the C-suite? That's my
There you go.
summary statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. What's our use cases?
But I think
for the
words,
C-suite. Yeah.
but words like enterprise actually matter because those are the words that the C-suite understand.
Right.
Closet they think of as being somewhere they go when they need to.
You got to dig yourself a bigger hole there, Anson.
That was said for Roger's benefit.
All right. So let's wrap this. It's been good conversation. Thank you all, and thanks for the audience. And we'll get the video up tomorrow or Wednesday, and then we'll start the new month next week in August. So looking forward to that. Have a great week, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
See y'all later. Bye.
Right.
Bye-bye.